Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with the Pastor. We're continuing our study with the Sermon on the Mount in the mornings. And we're kind of dealing with a section right after Jesus has said, unless your righteousness is better than the Pharisees, you will not be part of the kingdom. And he wanted his followers to actually have, better righteousness, better relationship with God, better living than what the Pharisees did, who were the most religious people at the time. And he's talked about, and one of the ways he's been talking about that is he's picked three subjects to start off with: giving, and prayer, and today we're going to look at fasting. And what he's saying is, the Pharisees do these things so everybody would applaud them, so everybody would tell them how great they are, and they would get applause from mankind. He says do these things for God. Be more concerned about God with them. And the same way today with fasting as we look at it. And this is Matthew chapter 6, verse 16. He says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Apparently, in the Old Testament, there were like 3 days a year that you were to fast. Biggest one being Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur was a day of atonement. It was a day that you would fast. It was a day that you would pray for forgiveness of your sins, and they would sacrifice the sacrificial lamb every year on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. They just celebrated Yom Kippur. I take a Hebrew class from a really nice man, Yehuda. And Yehuda, when he was off, he said, think about me tomorrow as I'm fasting and praying all day while you eat. And so, but they had regular times in the Old Testament that they were to fast. But by the time that Jesus came around, the really religious people, the really people who thought they were righteous, like the Pharisees, fasted twice a day. They fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. In fact, they got on to Jesus one time because his disciples weren't fasting, and Jesus said, well, while the bridegroom's with you, you don't fast. He says, they will fast, but right now they're not fasting because I'm with them. The early Christians did fast. In fact, it's kind of interesting, they did Tuesdays and Fridays instead of Mondays and Thursdays because they didn't want to be confused with the Jews, but they fasted regularly. And I do find it interesting that Jesus says when you fast, not if you fast. Or if you're thinking about fasting, he says, when you fast. It's just something you do. And, there are probably some medical conditions where you shouldn't fast. I used to think it was diabetes. I am diabetic. And then you start reading that this intermittent fasting is good for you. It helps your blood sugar. And so I think most of the studies out today talk about the benefits of fasting physically. But the fast I'm talking about is not for medical reasons. It's not for weight loss. It's not for weight control. It's not to control diabetes. It's not any of those things. The type of fast that Jesus is talking about is a spiritual fast to grow spiritually. And one of the things, if you piggyback off Yom Kippur, where it was a day of atonement, a day when they would be sorry for their sins, one of the ways that you fast is if there's some sin that's bothering you. Some sin that's giving you trouble. Because as you limit your food, and you can say no to your food, you can maybe limit that desire, or limit that thing that is causing you to sin, no matter what it might be. And so it does parallel, but when you fast, you also want to pray. But don't be like the Pharisees. Jesus said they wouldn't bathe, they wouldn't change clothes, and they would dishevel their face, and They just wanted everybody to know how miserable it was for them to be fasting that day, how hard it was for them to be going without food. Jesus said, no. Wash your face, put on good food, some of your nice clothes. Don't make it obvious to people that you're fasting. Let it be done in secret. And so that's really the key to this whole passage for Jesus' followers, is that do things for God. You do have an audience, and that audience is God. I remember Keith Miller wrote a book called A Taste of New Wine, and he said something one time that really affected me. He said, you know, we Christians a lot of times are kind of like actors on the stage, and we kind of want to perform for people. And he got to thinking, that's not the way we ought to live our lives. We shouldn't be performing for people. But then he did say, we do have an audience, and that audience is God. And we ought to be performing for Him. We ought to be doing everything for Him, everything to please Him. And if you live for an audience of one, everything else will take care of itself. If you live to please God and put all your actions that way, then everything else will take care of itself. And that's just what Jesus has been talking about His followers, that we need to live for an audience of one. And so when you give, do it in secret. Be generous, but give it in secret. When you pray, pray to God. Don't worry about what somebody else may think of your prayer or say your prayer. And when you fast only God knows. So only you and He knows what you're working on spiritually. Well, that does it for today. And tomorrow we'll talk about storing up treasures in heaven, and how we're to do that, and how we're to consider about our money and things. So I'll see you tomorrow morning. Have a great day.